All right, so for today, we're going to do the second half of our interview with Sam Hardy, international expert in antiquities trading. Just a reminder, this episode is done in conjunction with Real Archaeology. I'll put the website below. And this is a group of real archaeologists who are content creators that love to share their real passion and real stories about archaeology with you. So this is straight from the horse's mouth, not conjecture about ancient aliens, etc. So for today, our first topic will be the theft at the British Museum, a huge scandal in which an insider was stealing from the museum for decades. Now, I'm going to go into more depth than that in a later episode, the next edition of Archaeology Crime. Next, we're going to get a sense of how the market for trafficked antiquities actually works, the source countries, the destination countries, and what drives the demand and the supply. We're then going to go into a little bit more detail on what countries are actually doing to combat this trafficking, because there have been some recent efforts, and an actual success story from a place you very rarely hear good news these days, and that would be Ukraine. Some of the measures they're undertaking to prevent the trafficking and safeguard their cultural heritage. And finally, we'll have a little talk about how you can become more knowledgeable and involved in this issue if you do care about it. All right, without further ado, enjoy the rest of the interview. Now, it brings to mind also, obviously, we're talking about places like we mentioned, Ukraine, Bosnia. So once again, sort of violent places of violence, instability. But, we recently had uncovered this, I think it was years or decades long thefts from insiders at the British Museum. And in terms of platforms, I think they were using eBay. Is that right?
Yeah, it's just one guy.
Yeah.
I'm still not entirely sure that we even know the precise motives or the exact number of objects or the exact amount of money that he made, although I think one of the reasons that he was able to get away with it for so long, if since the case hasn't been concluded, if he was getting away with anything.
Mm.
But one of the reasons that these sales were not noticed for so long was because he wasn't even selling them for much money,
Yep.
not much of the proportion of their true value.
Yep.
And
Now,
yes, you get insider jobs quite often in that sense. If something's been taken from an institution, it is not extremely rare for the taking to have been an insider job.
yeah, and I mean that's also brings up another issue with archaeology, which is, what you're seeing in a museum or some kind of public exposition is like some small fraction of what's actually there. There's so many things just overflowing in archives that people don't know what to do with, and then it goes missing, and people don't notice. So that's actually another probably issue mixed up in all this. Now, we talked about a bunch of different countries now. What would you say are the major source countries and the major destination countries? I think that's probably changed a bit because we know some countries, one that comes to mind is China, have done a lot to sort of tighten this up and attack trafficking. But what would you say? So major destination countries, major source countries.
I mean, ultimately, commodities flow towards money, and that happens within these countries. Sometimes it happens against the net flow. So people with money in a poor country may buy antiquities that have been looted from a rich country. Um, and I mean, China's an interesting example as well because uh, there were thefts of artifacts that had been pillaged um, during invasions of China, which were stolen back in that sense from the museums in European countries where they were being curated. Um, so, yes, China has strict laws, but it also has, uh, or it appears that there are people within China who have the freedom to operate outside the law when they are rescuing things as they would see it.
And also just more generally in China as well. They have very strong anti-corruption laws, but those are applied very selectively. And antiquities trafficking is just one example.
Yeah, and it's something that you see in a lot of places. Politically exposed persons all over the world like to collect art and antiquities because it's a demonstration of their uh, cultural education, their sophistication, and also a demonstration of their ability to access rare resources. Um, it's one of the reasons that you see specific interest in buying conflict antiquities or antiquities that come from zones of crisis more broadly. Uh, they they like to be able to show that they can get these things that are so difficult to get.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, in general, the biggest source countries are the poorest countries, and the biggest market countries are the richest countries. Um, that is also affected by the markets in the rich countries. So, because the rich countries in Western Europe and North America like to trace their cultural genealogy back to Rome and
Mm.
Greece, and ultimately to Egypt and Mesopotamia, then we see more significant demand for, and therefore more significant looting of, antiquities in countries that have remains from the classical world. Um, but the market can also cultivate interest. So
Mm.
at times there have been things that weren't popular, weren't being collected. Sometimes they were being discarded by looters who were looking for other things. And then once they found out that they could make money by taking and selling those things as well, they started to do that as well.
And that
Uh,
that's also raises economics, which is something else I studied in another lifetime. But ultimately, the value of something is the supply and demand. And when something comes from a conflict zone, that can create a kind of morbid cachet, right? That an increase in demand, and then of course, when there is a conflict where things are being destroyed, that contracts the supply, and then you get something being much more valuable on the market. So another
yeah,
sort of way that there's an interplay of these things.
I mean, we've
Um,
even seen legal objects being sold legally with reference to the fact that there are now conflicts in the zones where they came from in order to cash in on that scarcity value.
all right, so we've talked about a lot of bad news, some pretty morbid stuff. Let's try to get a feel-good aspect in here. I recently read a bit about, that French authorities have developed really sophisticated systems to combat trafficking in antiquities, given how much is there. And then that they've also developed a particularly good collaboration with the United States. So what countries are actually doing a lot and being somewhat effective in combating this problem?
I mean, it's true that a lot of places either don't have the resources to devote to it or choose not to devote resources to it. Um, in that sense, France, Italy, and Spain in particular might be peculiar in that they have both the resources and the concern for their own heritage and um, the status of significant sources and significant markets. So they have really good specialist units um, of a significant size because, Belgium has had a fantastic expert uh, specialist police officer, but
Hmm.
you know one person can only do so much. You need a whole team with resources and partnerships and all the rest of it to be able to make a sizable difference, or at least to have some kind of difference that's a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Hmm.
Um, but yes, France, Italy, Spain, Turkey. Turkey has now got a unit within the Ministry of Culture, which is as big as some of the rich European countries.
Hmm.
And it's managed to build it up through the, the will, basically, of the cultural heritage workers in the country, despite the fact that Turkey's been going through uh, these succession of crises, and also has the troubles within its borders as well as the troubles over its borders.
Hmm.
Um, and the European Union has also been trying to invest in technology to get us beyond what is possible out of sheer human effort. So, um, although some of these technologies are still being prototyped, and uh, some of the ones that have got to the point of use are still being rolled out, we are starting to see um, programs that can help to identify uh, potentially looted objects on the market, um, monitoring systems that can help us to either uh, intervene when crime is being committed, or at least to go after suspects after the fact. So we are making progress not only in the response, but in the uh, capacity of the response, the quality of the action that is possible.
And I would also say the US is in an interesting position because it's primarily a destination for this stuff. And I'd say the number of stories you're seeing about things being returned and arrests being made and people repatriated is probably actually a good thing. It's not maybe that it's happening more, but that more active, measures are being
Exactly.
taken on the US. And that's what I had read about this collaboration they had with France. The US is also a very big internal source destination, basically Native American stuff. And
Yes,
there's been
yeah.
a lot more active, interest in that as well. So it's
But
not
but
all.
sadly, you don't protect uh, cultural property in a simple, straightforward, complete
Mm,
way, in the way that other countries do.
mm,
So I don't know whether it's to protect your market or what, but it does enable your indigenous heritage to slip out onto the international market.
mm.
And obviously, you also have your obsession with protection of private property to the point that people can do a lot of things that they wouldn't be allowed to do in Europe.
Yes, yeah. If it's your land, you can kind of do what you want.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yep.
even with things that many people would not really accept belong to you under the ground
Yeah,
or on the
exactly.
surface.
Yep. Yeah, your ownership of that land sort of goes down to the core of the earth, and that's the issue. There have been some changes in NAGPRA, which
Yeah,
started out as protection for Native American graves and has now expanded beyond that. But there's obviously a lot more to do. Um, Also, maybe something a little bit feel good, which is if you have a particular story that you like of a daring rescue or justice done, just can't use the Nebra Sky disc because we already talked about that one. Is there another particularly good story you have in mind of sort of the right outcome?
I mean, sadly, a lot of the cases I work on either don't have any outcome at all, or
Mm.
not don't necessarily have the one that you might like. But you know, I mean, apart from Turkey, which is where the cultural heritage workers have managed, despite uh, the coup and the crackdown afterwards, despite the economic crisis, despite everything, they've managed to maintain and expand uh, and operationalize a team of diverse specialists who are diverse among themselves as well as within their professional expertise. Like that's a really inspirational success for them. And Ukraine, I don't think anyone could deny that policing of cultural property crime used to be minimal for all sorts of reasons. And it's the same for a lot of the countries across the region and across the continent. But for all of the dark reasons that have prompted the change, Ukraine is making great efforts despite the fact that it is trying to stop a genocide.
Mm.
Obviously, partly because it's trying to stop a genocide and the destruction of its cultural heritage and the deprivation of its cultural heritage is a part of the system of trying to destroy its existence and the nation's existence. But they've got lots of professional networks who are doing everything that they can, more than you would imagine to be possible in this situation.
That's no, that's quite impressive. Yeah, I mean,
Just
obviously,
just before this call, I was chatting with a Ukrainian who's just come back from fieldwork, documenting uh, the situation with cultural heritage behind the front line.
mm,
Um, and that's a lot longer story, which I don't know I'm allowed to tell. So I
yep.
can I can say that they are making great efforts, and you know they're also making great efforts to attack it as a war crime.
Yep.
Um, Again, despite the fact that they have what I don't think anyone would deny are more serious war crimes to confront, and they have too many war
Yeah.
crimes to confront of any kind, they are
Yep.
still making a significant specific effort to try to protect their cultural heritage because they recognize uh, its value to their society.
And that's
So
also partially a predicate for the war, right? Is a very specific aim to say that Ukraine is not a country and then to destroy, vestiges of its unique cultural heritage.
yeah,
So,
and Russia's even using the crime to argue that Ukraine is corrupt and unpatriotic, and Russia is patriotic and effective as a governor to
mm,
try to characterize itself as the kind of government that you would like to have.
yeah, it's so backwards. But it is
Um,
good to hear. I have not really heard this much in the media, so that actually is an important kind of feel-good story.
and I think more broadly, you can see a lot of countries are recognizing that uh, something needs to be done, despite the lateness of everyone's response, or most countries' responses. Um, there are an increasing number of specialist units. There's increasing coordination and cooperation. Uh, there's increasing innovation in responses and in uh, even in how responses are made. So, like America's been having success, which is great. It would be difficult to deny that a lot of that success is down to the choices of certain professionals to make a specific effort, and when they retire or whatever else, you would need other professionals to make that same decision to continue having that same success. Um, but regardless of all of these nuances and uncertainties, we are seeing a greater, more effective, and increasingly effective efforts to try to prevent these crimes, stop these crimes, punish the perpetrators, and restore justice and restore heritage to the communities that have been victimized.
Yep, that's good to hear some slow progress at least. Finally, last question. So, what can normal people, non-archaeologists, civilians do to help in any event to get involved in this? And then, like, how can people perhaps, do you have a website or get in touch with you, get involved in the cause?
I mean, one of the things that people can do is just to show interest. Um, everyone responds to attention. The media will report on things that people read and watch. Politicians will act on stories that people follow. Um, so when they see that the public is concerned, they do something. Um, there are lots of local, regional, national, international communities that people can join to follow the news and to get involved in activities when those communities are organizing things. Um, and it's difficult to recommend specific things because some of these groups are quite niche. If you're interested specifically your state's heritage or your community's heritage or a particular historical culture's heritage or whatever else. Um, uh, and I mean, I blog my research as part of the effort um, to share the information, to make it accessible and usable. I blog it on Conflict Antiquities. It's just a WordPress site.
Okay.
Um, uh, I sadly I don't take I don't use volunteers, partly
Mhm.
because I think everyone should be paid for their labor, um, and partly just because even organizing volunteer efforts can be a lot of effort in itself. Um, but yeah, if you're interested in it, show it, um, and look for communities of action where you can take part. I mean, that's that's how these things change.
Yeah, what I would add, certainly, I mean, I don't think I have too many art collectors watching my show, but certainly there are procedures now that are becoming more regularized for verifying the provenance of things, and now we're seeing penalties for not adhering to that. And we hear about those every day. So certainly do that if you're buying stuff, and then
Well,
just
yeah,
going to museum and patronizing the arts, because if we're talking about economics, those museum ticket entry prices, maybe not so much in the UK as a lot of the museums are free, but in many other places, that
but they're
is going to
getting
raise.
closed.
Sorry.
I mean, yes, I think it's a great thing that museum access in the UK is a lot freer than in the US. But one of the problems is that because the money comes from the public via the state, if the state is looking for a way to save money, it cuts it out of culture. So we are
it's a
losing
cost.
collections and
Yeah,
institutions.
it's a cost center. Whereas in places where you pay for the museums, if people go, it will raise the value of art and antiquities to the state because people are visiting them. So in any
But
event,
like even then, footfall, if the government sees that people are attending, it recognizes it as a valuable resource that it should
it,
maintain as a part of maintaining public support for itself.
yeah, that's my point. Yeah,
Cynically, yeah, yeah.
old-fashioned economics. So and people visit your museums, patronize the arts, and that actually will do a little bit of a part. I'll put your website up so people can at least have a source if they want to know more. Um, and
And
I
like you say, yes, if you're involved in the market, please just take care for yourself, even if you're not overly concerned
hmm,
with your like a lot of people on the market tell themselves that they are rescuing these things and caring for these things. Um, and I have no doubt that a lot of people are very sincere in that belief. I have no doubt that sometimes it can be true to a certain extent, but the consequences of even sincere rescue can be far worse than the the benefits. And
hmm.
even if you set that aside, yeah,
Yeah, we are
like,
seeing stories of the strong arm of the law finding these people. So
yeah,
be careful. Uh, And for my part, I'll actually be continuing to feature archaeology crime stories, both the good and the bad, where things are found and when they're lost forever. So I'll be doing that. Um, Thanks a lot for your time, Sam. We've gone over time, but hopefully this should help get the word out there. And I'll do my best to make sure as many people see this as possible.
great. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad that it's nice that there are these kinds of things where um, audiences of interest can find out what's happening.
Yep. Yeah. One of the beauties of the web now. So thanks a lot and have a good rest of your day. And hopefully we'll hear good news from this
Thanks.
space on a daily basis.
Yeah, yeah. Good luck with this.
All right. Thanks a lot. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.